The autumn wind swept across the endless golden fields of rural Kansas, USA. Under the gray morning sky, a worn-out pickup truck rattled slowly down a dirt road before finally stopping beside an old farmhouse that looked as though it had been fighting against time itself. Inside that farmhouse lived Jacob Miller, a 42-year-old farmer whose hands were rough from years of hard work and whose face carried the silent scars of disappointment. There was a time when Jacob had been proud of what he had built. He had inherited a small piece of farmland from his father. It wasn't much, just a few acres of cornfields, a chicken coop, 2 dairy cows, and a rusty red tractor. But to Jacob, it had been everything. He had a loving wife, Emily Miller, whose smile could brighten the darkest days, and a 10-year-old son named Noah, a cheerful boy who dreamed of becoming an engineer someday. Their lives had never been luxurious, but they had been happy. Every morning, Jacob would wake before sunrise, drink coffee with Emily on the porch, and walk through the fields while Noah chased butterflies between the rows of crops. Back then, life felt simple. Back then, hope came naturally, but everything changed. 2 years earlier, an unforgiving drought had struck Kansas. Rain stopped coming. The rich soil began to crack. The cornfields turned yellow. Jacob watched helplessly as months of hard work dried up beneath the scorching summer sun. He borrowed money from the bank, believing the next season would save him. It didn't. The second year proved even worse. Storms destroyed what little had survived. Debts piled up. Bills arrived every week. The pressure became unbearable. First, Jacob sold one of his cows, then the second. After that, he had no choice but to sell his beloved tractor. The same tractor his father had taught him to drive when he was only 12 years old. Watching it being hauled away felt like losing a member of the family. One cold evening, Emily stood in their tiny kitchen, staring into nearly empty cabinets. There was half a bag of flour, 3 potatoes, a small carton of milk, nothing else. She closed the cabinet slowly. "Jacob," she said softly. He looked up from the pile of unpaid bills spread across the dining table. "Yes?" Emily hesitated. "When was the last time you bought something for yourself?" Jacob forced a smile. "I don't need anything." She sat beside him. "You haven't replaced your boots in 3 years. They still work. They have holes in them. I'll manage." Emily lowered her eyes. "What if things don't get better?" The question lingered heavily in the room. Jacob looked toward Noah's bedroom. He could hear his son laughing quietly while building imaginary machines out of old cardboard boxes. For Noah's sake, he couldn't give up. "We'll find a way," Jacob said. "I promise." Even though he had absolutely no idea how. The next morning, before sunrise, Jacob put on his faded denim jacket and stepped outside. His boots were worn, his truck barely started. His wallet contained only $8.73. Still, he drove toward the nearest town. If he could find temporary work, loading trucks, fixing fences, cleaning warehouses, anything would help. The town of Maple Creek had once been bustling. Now it seemed everyone was struggling. Jacob stood outside hardware stores asking if anyone needed extra help. "No openings." "Sorry, we already hired someone." He heard the same answer over and over. By noon, exhaustion settled into his bones. He sat on a bench near the town square, staring at the few dollars in his wallet. He hadn't eaten all day. His stomach growled. Across the street, the smell of fresh burgers drifted from a diner. For a moment, he considered buying lunch. But then he remembered Noah. His son needed school supplies. Emily needed groceries. He folded the money back into his wallet. He could wait. As Jacob walked toward his truck, he noticed an elderly man sitting outside a small grocery store. The old man's clothes were dirty. His beard was gray. In front of him sat a cardboard sign. It read, "Veteran, hungry, anything helps." People passed by without looking. Some pretended not to notice. Others glanced briefly before hurrying away. Jacob stopped. He looked down at his wallet. $8.73. That was all he had. He stared at the veteran. The veteran looked back with tired eyes. "You don't have to stop," the man said gently. Jacob swallowed. When did you last eat? The old man smiled weakly. Yesterday morning, I think. Jacob looked again at the diner across the street. He could finally eat something. He desperately wanted to. Instead, he walked into the grocery store. A few minutes later, he came back carrying a sandwich, a bottle of water, and a small bag of fruit. He handed them to the veteran. "I wish I could do more," Jacob said. The veteran looked stunned. "You bought this for me?" Jacob nodded. "It's not much." The old man's eyes filled with tears. "Son," he whispered, "most people walk right past me." Jacob sat beside him. "My father taught me something when I was young." "What was that?" "Never ignore someone who's hurting just because you're hurting too." For the first time in weeks, Jacob smiled. A real smile. The veteran extended his trembling hand. "My name is Walter." "Jacob." Walter squeezed his hand firmly. "You have a good heart, Jacob Miller." Jacob laughed softly. "A good heart doesn't pay the bills." Walter looked at him carefully. "Maybe not." He paused. "But don't lose it." Hours later, Jacob finally drove home. The Kansas sunset painted the sky orange and purple. He pulled into the driveway and stepped out of the truck. Emily met him at the porch. "Did you find work?" Jacob shook his head. "No." She lowered her gaze. Then she noticed something unusual. "You seem calmer." Jacob thought about Walter, about the sandwich, about the gratitude in the old veteran's eyes. "I don't know why," he admitted, "but I think I remembered who I am today." Emily squeezed his hand. "We'll get through this." Inside the house, Noah ran toward him carrying a drawing. "Dad, look!" It showed a large farm, new tractors, healthy crops, a beautiful red barn, and standing in the middle of it all was Jacob. "What do you think?" Noah asked excitedly. Jacob stared at the picture. His eyes became moist. "It's perfect." Noah pointed to the drawing. "One day our farm will look like this again." Jacob knelt down in front of his son. "You really believe that?" Noah grinned. "Of course." "Why?" "Because you're my dad." Jacob hugged him tightly. At that moment, despite the debts, the hunger, and the uncertainty, a tiny spark of hope returned to his heart. He didn't know it yet. He had no idea that the simple act of giving his last few dollars to a hungry stranger would soon change the course of his life forever. Far away, under the dim streetlights of Maple Creek, the old veteran named Walter watched Jacob's truck disappear into the distance. Then Walter slowly reached into his coat pocket and pulled out an old photograph. He looked at it for several moments before whispering to himself, "After all these years, maybe this is the man I've been waiting for." And with that mysterious sentence, the first chapter of Jacob Miller's extraordinary journey came to an end. The morning after Jacob Miller helped the hungry veteran, life returned to its harsh routine. Nothing had changed. The unpaid bills were still stacked on the dining table. The kitchen cabinets were still nearly empty. The farm still struggled beneath the weight of debt. And Jacob still had no idea how he would save his family. Yet something inside him felt different. For the first time in months, he had gone to sleep with a strange sense of peace. He had almost nothing, yet he had chosen kindness. He didn't know why, but that choice made him feel human again. 3 days passed. Jacob spent his mornings repairing broken fences with old tools, and his afternoons trying to bring life back into the exhausted fields. Every evening, Noah would sit beside him on the porch. "Dad," Noah asked one night, "do you think dreams come true?" Jacob looked toward the dark horizon. "I think dreams only come true if people refuse to quit." Noah smiled. "Then ours will come true." Jacob wished he had his son's confidence, because deep inside, fear still lived in his heart. The following Tuesday, Jacob drove into Maple Creek again. He needed animal feed, even if he had to buy the cheapest kind available. As he entered town, he glanced toward the grocery store where he had met Walter. The old veteran was gone. Jacob looked around. No sign. He parked his truck and stepped inside the grocery store. The cashier recognized him immediately. "You're the farmer who bought food for that veteran, right?" Jacob nodded. "Have you seen him?" The cashier looked surprised. "You know him?" "Not really." "He came here yesterday asking about you." Jacob frowned. Asking about me. He wanted your name. What did you tell him? The cashier shrugged. I only said you were Jacob Miller from the old Miller farm. A strange feeling settled in Jacob's stomach. Why would Walter want to find him? Jacob left the store carrying his small bag of supplies. As he reached his truck, he noticed someone standing near it. Walter. The elderly veteran wore the same worn coat, but today his posture seemed different. Straighter, more confident. You found me, Jacob said. Walter smiled. I told you not to lose your good heart. Jacob chuckled. You still haven't answered my question. What question? Why were you looking for me? Walter remained silent for several seconds. Then he said quietly, would you have time for coffee? Jacob hesitated. I can't afford coffee. Walter smiled. This one's on me. The small diner in Maple Creek was nearly empty. Rain tapped softly against the windows. Jacob and Walter sat across from each other. For a while, neither spoke. Then Walter finally asked, why did you help me? Jacob shrugged. You were hungry. You barely had money yourself. I know. Then why? Jacob looked down at his rough hands. My father raised me to believe that if we ignore people in need, eventually we forget our own humanity. Walter studied him carefully. You remind me of someone. Who? My younger self. Jacob looked surprised. You were a farmer? Walter laughed softly. No. Then his smile faded. I was a soldier. Walter stared out the rain-covered window. I served this country for 22 years. Jacob listened quietly. I fought overseas. I lost friends. I missed birthdays. I missed Christmases. Walter's voice grew heavier. When I finally came home, I thought life would be easy. What happened? My wife died from cancer. Jacob lowered his eyes. My son blamed me for never being there. Walter paused. We stopped speaking. Silence filled the diner. I lost everything after that, Walter continued. My house, my purpose, my family. Jacob felt a lump form in his throat. What about your son now? Walter smiled sadly. I haven't seen him in 15 years. The waitress refilled their coffee. Walter leaned closer. Do you know something, Jacob? What? When people see a homeless man, they think they know his story. Jacob nodded slowly. But they don't. No, Walter said. They only see the ending. After finishing their coffee, Walter reached into his coat pocket. He pulled out the old photograph Jacob had seen days earlier. He slid it across the table. Jacob picked it up. The picture showed a much younger Walter standing beside another man. Both were smiling. Behind them stood a large farm. Who's this? Jacob asked. Walter pointed toward the other man. His name was Thomas Miller. Jacob froze. His breathing stopped. Thomas Miller. His father. Jacob looked up. You knew my father? Walter nodded. He saved my life. Jacob stared at him in disbelief. What? We served together. Jacob's hands trembled. My father never served in the military. Walter smiled. He never told you. Told me what? Walter leaned back. Before becoming a farmer, your father enlisted when he was young. Jacob's eyes widened. He never mentioned that. He wasn't proud of war, Walter said quietly, but he was proud of protecting people. Walter looked down at the photograph. There was an explosion. The man beside me risked everything to pull me out. He carried me to safety. He saved my life. Jacob couldn't speak. For 42 years, he thought he knew everything about his father. Apparently, he had known almost nothing. Why didn't you tell me this before? Jacob whispered. Walter looked ashamed. Because I wasn't sure. Sure about what? Whether kindness still existed? Jacob frowned. What do you mean? Walter's eyes filled with emotion. I spent years becoming bitter. I stopped believing in people. I thought everyone only cared about themselves. He looked directly into Jacob's eyes. Then a struggling farmer gave away his last dollars to feed a stranger. Walter's voice cracked. And that stranger happened to be the man whose life had once been saved by your father. Jacob couldn't hold back his tears. He stared again at the photograph. His father's smile looked exactly the way Noah smiled. For the first time in years, Jacob felt proud. Proud not because of wealth, not because of success, but because of the legacy his father had left behind. Walter stood up. "I have something else for you." He placed a folded piece of paper on the table. Jacob opened it. It was an address. "What is this?" "My home." "You have a home?" Walter smiled. "Yes." Jacob looked confused. You thought I was homeless." Walter nodded. "I let people believe that." "Why?" "Because I was searching." "For what?" "For someone worthy." Jacob stared at him. "Worthy of what?" Walter looked toward the rain outside. Then he turned back. "Come tomorrow. There's something I want to show you." "What is it?" Walter picked up his coat. "If I tell you now, you'll never believe me." He walked toward the diner entrance. "Wait!" Jacob called out. Walter stopped. "Why me?" The old veteran smiled warmly. "Because your father once saved my life." He opened the door. "And because you reminded me that goodness still exists in this world." Then he disappeared into the rain. That evening, Jacob returned home in silence. Emily immediately noticed something was different. "What happened?" Jacob placed the photograph on the table. Emily picked it up. "Who's this?" "My father." "And the other man?" Jacob took a deep breath. "His name is Walter." "The veteran?" Jacob nodded. "He knew Dad." Emily's eyes widened. "What?" "He says Dad saved his life." Noah rushed over. "Grandpa was a hero?" Jacob looked at the smiling face in the photograph. For the first time since losing everything, hope returned stronger than before. "I think," Jacob said softly, "he was." Outside, thunder rolled across the Kansas sky. Tomorrow, Jacob Miller would visit the address Walter had given him. He expected answers. He expected stories. What he did not expect was that behind that address waited a secret capable of changing his family's future forever. The next morning, Jacob Miller woke before sunrise. For several minutes, he lay awake staring at the cracked ceiling above his bed. The folded piece of paper Walter had given him rested on the nightstand beside him. An address, nothing more. No explanation, no clues, just an address and a promise. "There's something I want to show you." Walter's words echoed through Jacob's mind. Emily slowly opened her eyes. "You're really going?" she asked softly. Jacob nodded. "I have to." "What if it's nothing?" He looked at the paper in his hand. "Then I'll come home." "And if it's something?" Jacob took a deep breath. "I guess we'll find out." Emily reached over and held his hand. "Be careful." "I will." Noah appeared in the doorway, still wearing his pajamas. "Dad?" "Yeah, buddy." "Do you think Grandpa would have gone?" Jacob smiled faintly. "If it meant helping someone, I think he would." Noah grinned. "Then you should go." An hour later, Jacob's old pickup truck rolled down the quiet Kansas roads. Morning fog drifted over endless fields. He checked the address again. It led far beyond Maple Creek, far beyond anywhere he usually traveled. Nearly 2 hours later, he reached the outskirts of a neighboring county. Jacob frowned. This wasn't what he expected. The roads became cleaner. The farms became larger. The houses grew more impressive. Eventually, his truck stopped in front of a pair of massive black iron gates. He looked up. Beyond them stood a breathtaking estate. Hundreds of acres stretched across the horizon. Perfect fields, modern farming equipment, large barns, shining grain silos, and at the center, a beautiful white farmhouse overlooking the entire property. Jacob's mouth fell open. No way. He checked the address. It matched. Exactly. Before he could react, the gates slowly opened. Jacob's heartbeat quickened. His old pickup truck drove down a long stone driveway lined with oak trees. When he finally stopped near the main house, Walter stepped outside. Except, he looked completely different. Gone was the appearance of a helpless, homeless veteran. Gone was the exhausted man sitting on the sidewalk. Walter wore clean clothes. His posture was proud, his expression calm. Jacob stepped out of the truck. "You've got to be kidding me." Walter smiled. "I was wondering how long it would take you to say that." Jacob stared at him. "You own this place?" "I do. You let me believe you were homeless." Walter lowered his eyes. "Yes." Jacob's confusion turned into frustration. "Why?" Walter remained silent for a moment. Then he answered, "Because I needed to know if kindness still existed." They walked toward the porch. "I spent years angry at the world," Walter admitted. "I had money. I had land. I had everything people dream of. But after losing my wife and my relationship with my son," he paused, "I lost faith in people." Jacob listened quietly. "So you pretended to be homeless?" Walter nodded. "Sometimes. I would sit in different towns. I watched how people treated strangers. Most never stopped." Jacob looked away. "And when I gave you food?" Walter smiled. "You didn't know who I was. You didn't expect anything. You simply chose compassion." Walter opened the front door. Inside, the house was elegant yet warm. Family photographs lined the walls. Military medals were displayed in glass cases. Old farming awards filled shelves. Jacob stopped in front of one picture. It showed Walter standing beside Thomas Miller. His father. They were laughing, young, full of life. "When was this taken?" Jacob whispered. 30 years ago, Walter replied. "He talked about you all the time." Jacob looked surprised. "Me?" "He carried pictures of Emily and you after your wedding." Walter chuckled. "He couldn't stop bragging about becoming a grandfather when Noah was born." Tears gathered in Jacob's eyes. "I miss him." Walter nodded. "So do I." Walter led him into a study. The room smelled of old books and polished wood. He opened a drawer. Inside were dozens of letters tied together with a faded blue ribbon. "What are these?" Jacob asked. "Your father's letters." Jacob froze. "My father's?" Walter carefully handed them over. "He wrote them to me." Jacob's hands trembled as he untied the ribbon. The first letter read, "Dear Walter, if you're reading this, then I hope life has been kind to you. If it hasn't, remember what we learned together. A person's value isn't measured by what they own, but by how they treat others." Jacob couldn't continue. His vision blurred with tears. Walter spoke softly. "Your father saved my life twice." Jacob looked up. "What do you mean?" "The first time was during military service." Walter pointed toward the letters. "The second time was after I lost my wife. He reminded me that life still had meaning." For hours, Jacob sat reading. Letter after letter revealed a side of Thomas Miller he had never known. His father wrote about courage, about forgiveness, about family, about choosing kindness when bitterness felt easier. One sentence stood out above all the others. "If you ever have the opportunity to help my family someday, don't hesitate. I'd do the same for yours." Jacob lowered the letter. His heart pounded. He looked toward Walter. "You remembered." Walter smiled. "I never forgot." Later that afternoon, Walter guided Jacob outside. They walked through the enormous property. "This farm," Walter said, "was built from gratitude." Jacob looked confused. "What do you mean?" "When Thomas saved me, I promised myself I'd honor that gift by building something meaningful." Walter gestured toward the land. "I started small. I worked. I invested. I failed. I tried again. Eventually." He smiled. "This happened." Jacob stared at the vast fields. "It's incredible." Walter stopped walking. "Jacob." "Yes?" "Do you know why I asked you here?" Jacob hesitated. "No." Walter turned toward him. "I don't have much family left." Jacob said nothing. "My son refuses to speak to me. I don't know how much time I have." The old man's voice softened. "But I know this." He looked directly into Jacob's eyes. "Your father believed in you. He believed kindness creates ripples that travel farther than we can imagine." Walter reached into his pocket. He pulled out a small brass key. Jacob stared at it. What is that? Walter placed it in Jacob's hand. A beginning. A beginning of what? Walter smiled. Tomorrow, I'm going to show you something that belongs to your family. Jacob's eyes widened. My family? Walter nodded. Something Thomas Miller never knew existed. The wind swept across the endless fields. Jacob closed his fingers around the key. Questions raced through his mind. What did the key open? What secret had remained hidden all these years? Why had Walter waited until now? As the sun slowly disappeared beyond the Kansas horizon, Walter looked toward the fading light and whispered, "Your father planted a seed decades ago, Jacob. And it's finally time for the harvest." Jacob tightened his grip on the brass key. He had arrived expecting answers. Instead, he had discovered an even greater mystery, one that had the power not only to transform his future, but to rewrite the story of the Miller family forever.